Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Here's today's moderator, Nadia Giordana.
Hello and welcome to Generations, the Roundtable Edition. I'm Nadia Giordana. Co-hosting with me today, Karen Risette.
Hi, Nadia.
Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's always so much fun to have you here.
Thanks.
And Ellie Freed. Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you, Nadia. I'm happy to be here and excited about our topic.
Me too. And Gloria Van Demeltraat, welcome. Gloria
Thank
is
you.
one of our newest co-hosts, and we're happy to have her.
Delighted to be here, and I think this is a fun thing to do. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we have a very special guest, Lori Spangler, who is an author, and she's written a book about her travels to every single one of our 50 states. Welcome, Lori.
Nadia, ladies, thank you for having me.
Well, Lori, one of the questions that jumped out at me was, how many states had you visited before you decided, let's go for visiting all 50 states?
I was in my late 30s and I just finished a graduate degree and I was ready for a new goal. And I've always loved to travel, so I thought, why not visit all 50 states? I didn't think I had traveled much before that. So I took a piece of flip chart paper, wrote down all the states, and then checked off the states that I'd already visited. And at that point, I'd been to 20 states. So then I had 30 states left, and it took me about 15 years to make it to all the states. My last state was Hawaii that I went to.
And how did you travel to all of these states? Did you?
Oftentimes I flew, sometimes I drove. Oftentimes I flew and had a rental car. One really fun trip was when I decided to be wild and crazy when I went to Indianapolis, and I just used a cab while I was there. And in my book, I call it Weekend with Mohammed. He was my taxi driver, and he was so nice. He gave me his card. So I went to some museums. I went to the Indy 500 Speedway, and I would just call him, and he would pick me up and take me and come and pick me up again. So it was very fun.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful.
Was the road trips, were there some road trips? And if so, compared to flying, which one did you do more of?
Oh, I would say I did more flying. The road trips were when I was younger. A couple of road trips I took, not necessarily a road trip, like I took a train from St. Paul down to Austin, Texas, 20 hours in a seat. I also took Greyhound bus from here to the South Dakota, to the Black Hills where I worked for a summer. So some of those things, but they were very fun at the time. But road trips with other people can be fun as well.
Did you stay a time in each area, or was it not the same? It just depended on something else?
Oh, great question. So my criteria was that for each state, I had to be at least an hour in the state, and it had to be more than just transferring planes. So some states I spent longer periods of time in. When I went to Oregon to visit my brother and his family, my mom and I went for a week. And then when I went to other states, I would maybe just go for a weekend or a long weekend. So it just varied. And sometimes people will say, well, what's your favorite state? Is it the state that you visited the longest? And it's not. We just have such a beautiful country. I mean, Minnesota, of course, is my favorite state. But I couldn't decide on a different state that was my favorite because everything was just great.
I feel the same way about Minnesota. It's my favorite state, but all the places that I've traveled, I particularly remember where I've had a fun or unusual or weird adventure.
Yes.
One of the places was we went to Glacier Park with my husband's brother, and our families went. And they had an early thaw and a lot of rain while we were there. And they had like an avalanche of trees.
Oh,
We stayed in, I think it's called a McDonald Lodge.
okay.
And the quarters for the students who work there in the summer is across a little creek. And these trees came down the mountainside and landed in that little creek, and they stopped kind of out by the edge of the lake.
Was it the
And-
rain that caused that?
Yeah, it just was pouring rain. So it stopped everything up, and everything started to flood, and we had to leave there while we could get out before the whole place flooded.
Wow.
But we had a lot of fun anyway.
Exciting,
It's exciting.
It was.
When I went to Glacier, it wasn't quite as exciting. I was 16, and two of my sisters worked there for the summer at Glacier Park. And now we would call, to make sure people are home. And my parents did not want to spend $1 on a phone call. So we just drove from Minnesota to Montana, and we found them. It was crazy. We found them right away. But what I remember about the trip was the drive back. I had just gotten my driver's license, and in Montana at the time, there was no speed limit. So you, I know, so you could drive any speed. So my dad let me drive, but only a few miles, just to say that I drove 70 miles an hour.
Oh,
Yes, yes. And you were probably driving 70 miles an hour to get out.
True. Oh,
Yeah.
my. What was the best part of the journey to all these states to you?
I think the best part, probably two things. First of all, just seeing what a beautiful country we have and the variety in terms of geography, mountains and rivers and streams and farmlands and just the variety there. But then just the nice people I met, that people that would go above and beyond when they didn't need to. When I was in Alabama, I stopped at the spur of the moment at the Alabama Music Hall of Fame. And just very interesting. And as I was leaving, I asked at the gift shop if they had a CD with different types of music on it, and they didn't. But she said, I might have something in the back. So she went to the back room, and she was gone for like 10 minutes. And she came out, and she gave me a CD from their grand opening a few years before. I know, and I mean, she didn't have to go back and look for it, and she didn't charge me for it, and she would, just very nice. And I love the CD, and I keep it in my car and play it in my car.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so what I remember is, the great music, but just how nice this young woman was as well. We have such great people in the United States.
Yeah, that's true.
That's so interesting because we look around for the scenery sort of as the destination.
Yes.
And then when you have an encounter with someone that makes it memorable, it's really special.
Then it becomes the people, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, that's a great point. The other person that I always remember from my travels is when I went to Hawaii, and everyone loves Hawaii. But I always remember the woman that sold me my turtle necklace. So I was, I know.
That's beautiful.
It's a jade turtle. I met this woman, a Hawaiian woman. She was a short, little, petite woman, a part-time worker, and she was telling me how turtles stand for long life and prosperity. And so she told me how she had gone to Las Vegas a few years before for her 50th high school reunion, and she didn't win any money. But then the next year she went, she was wearing her turtle, and then she won $5,000.
That would do it for me.
Well, and she was very good. So right below the counter, she whips out this photo showing her with a big check for $5,000
that's
and wearing her turtle.
Oh, how
So
fun.
it is. So for me, you're right. I mean, Hawaii is beautiful, but just meeting her was just wonderful. And I always think of her whenever I wear my turtle, and I especially wear it on long trips when I'm traveling.
Wonderful, and it's kept you safe thus far.
It's kept me
apparently.
safe so far. Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious about your book. How do you write about the stories in each stage, or the people you meet, or did you follow a format, or how did you do it?
Gloria, that's a great question. I did not plan to write a book while I was traveling, because if I had, I would have taken better notes. So I finished my travels, and a friend of mine, Shelley, said, "So now you're going to write a book." And I'm like, well, why would I do that? And, this would be good. And then I said, who would want to read a book by me, right? And she said, your nieces and nephews would. And if you ever want me to do something, mention my nieces and nephews, so then of course I'll do it. So when I started to write, I thought, I'll just do a little pamphlet for them, right? And then I started remembering things, and I would remember places I went to and people I met, or different experiences like a flat tire or the smell of lobster. And when I would remember things, I would write them down, and then I started to organize, and pretty soon I had a book. And then I had to decide how I was going to organize it. So I did it chronologically. And then sometimes for me, I didn't remember something until I was talking to someone. And so, for example, your situation of Glacier, I might be talking to a friend about Glacier, and then it will, oh, that's right, I should write that in my book, and then I would take a note. So I would do little things like that. And then I would try to do each chapter chronologically for what I did while I was there as well.
So each one is different. Yeah.
Each chapter is different.
Yeah.
Some are short, some are long. Some have more situations where I met interesting people. Some are talking more about the things I did while I was there. Just a variety of things.
So you didn't really journal on these trips then?
No, I did not journal. There were a few trips where I had journaled a little bit. And then also for me, my mother was a great letter writer. And I don't want to say I'm a hoarder, but there are a few things I could probably get rid of. So sometimes I would go back and look at my old letters that she had written. And that would remind me of something that I had done on a trip, or she would ask me about something. And then I would put those notes in my book as well.
Interesting.
I do journal when I travel. I don't travel as much as you do, but I was going to say the people at this lodge in Glacier were wonderful too. They were so helpful and wanting to get us out of there, you know, before there was danger. And we were on the phone with our teenage sons who had jobs and couldn't go with us. And they were saying, oh my gosh, that sounds like fun. I mean, when these trees were coming down this mountainside, it sounded like a bowling alley. It was so
My
noisy.
goodness, yeah.
They just thought they should be there.
But frightening. Oh,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
Frightening.
It's amazing how I think travel becomes just something you can't wait to get on the next trip and the next car trip or train trip
Right,
or airplane, and where's it going to take you, because it just is sort of infectious in your psyche. I think when you've done some traveling, I never thought that I had traveled very much with my family of origin, but you know, when you start thinking about these things, memories come up. And my first trip was on a train with my mother coming back. Well, this was after we'd gotten there. My dad joined the Army Air Force for World War II shortly after Pearl Harbor, which 75 years ago now.
Yes.
And I was about 2 years old. And we went to San Antonio, Texas to accompany him for training. And we lived there then while he did his training navigator bombardier for a B-29. And then my mother and I, and this is the trip that was so remarkable, we had to get back from San Antonio because he was leaving from there and to go to Saipan and to fly these B-29 bombing flights over Japan. And by that time I was about 3.5. And that trip back from San Antonio, Texas, on that train with my mother, who by this time was pregnant and not feeling well, was a remarkable experience in my life. And, you know, it's amazing to recall it because one of the things that I found was people, again, and my mother wasn't able to really tend to me very much because she wasn't feeling well. And she took her wallet out and she asked a serviceman if he would please take me to the dining car and get me some food. He took the wallet and he went and did that, brought it back, didn't touch anything in the wallet, but that was her whole life that she had handed over to him.
Trust.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Wow.
And then my grandparents were here in St. Paul and met us when we got back. But along the way, the train had to stop because there was something wrong with it, had to go overnight in one of these old hotels near the train station. And my mother was scared, so she and another woman decided to pair up. And the three of us slept in a double bed with me in the middle, and this other woman was a total stranger,
Yeah.
you know. But it was a time when, yeah, we were trusting.
You did things like that.
Yes, it was a different time in our lives.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
remember Greyhound bus trips with the family to visit an aunt in Chicago. And that was back in the 50s from Iowa and then maybe into the 60s but those Greyhound bus trips were a big deal to a child.
Yeah.
I don't know how great that would be today, but maybe it would be fun.
Well,
Probably more comfortable.
Yeah.
Yes.
I took
We
a
were
Greyhound
talking-
bus tour with some
Great seats.
girlfriends when I was 19.
Mhm.
We went up through Canada to go to Quebec, and then through Niagara Falls coming home. We had such a good time. We stayed at the Chateau Frontenac,
Mm.
which costs an arm and a leg now.
Isn't that still there today, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yes.
yeah.
That's
Very
where the
expensive.
royalty stays when they come. And it was $20 a night. That was the most expensive thing we did.
Yeah.
But it's in the hundreds now.
Yes.
So that was a lot of fun.
We were talking about train trips, and Karen, it was fun to hear about that. A few years ago, my husband and I took a month-long Amtrak train trip to the western United States.
Oh,
We
how
started in
fun.
St. Paul, went to Chicago, and overnighted there, and then we got on the train to go to the Grand Canyon. And it was a fabulous tour, and we stayed about a week or so in between areas. We went to the Grand Canyon, then from there to Los Angeles, from Los Angeles up to Seattle, Washington, and then from Washington back over to Minnesota. But I think the most beautiful part of the trip was from LA to Seattle. If anyone wants to take a train trip, that's the one to take. It's beautiful. They have newer trains that are really, really nicely outfitted now. And the scenery is phenomenal. You have the ocean on one side and the mountains on the other. It's just beautiful, beautiful. But one of the, Karen, also you reminded me, one time between Chicago and the Grand Canyon, we're going through a lot of prairie land. And there are cattle ranches, huge
Sure.
cattle ranches, and the cows get on the track. And the train runs over the cows. And so we had a delay. We had to stop while they went under the train and cleaned it all out. And my husband said, whatever you do, don't have steak tomorrow.
And don't look.
Good
Little
thinking.
roadkill.
Yeah, no roadkill.
Well, what would be, Lori, or any of you, some of the most unusual things you might have seen? Now, I'll mention one thing that my husband and I saw, and it was in some obscure corner of Nebraska, about 10 miles off the main road, but certainly not a big freeway. And it was Carhenge. I think you've seen things on TV about Carhenge, this replication of Stonehenge, but made out of old cars
Oh, wow.
by this farmer out in the middle of the field. Some of my favorite pictures were taken that day at this place called Carhenge, which will someday rust away.
Yeah.
But I thought that was the most unusual thing I'd ever seen.
Wow,
I saw-
interesting.
I
Yeah.
saw many interesting things, and it probably wasn't that unusual, but unusual because of not a lot of people have seen it.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Concord, Massachusetts, and saw the house where Louisa May Alcott lived.
Oh.
When she wrote Little Women, women always know who Louisa May Alcott
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
And so I saw the house, but the real interesting part was her bedroom where she actually wrote the book. And her dad had made this small little desk for her, really a little shelf on the wall. And she taught herself how to write left-handed. So when, I know, isn't that amazing?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, because she would write right-handed, right? No computers back then. And when her hand would get tired, she didn't want to waste time letting it rest. So then she would write left-handed and then keep switching hands.
Oh, my word.
I know, isn't that
That's how
just
clever.
amazing? Very
Yes,
clever.
very unusual.
Very unusual, very clever, yes, yes. So
interesting.
I've met other people that have been to the house, but didn't recall seeing the shelf where she wrote.
Yeah.
So that's what I think of when I think of something unusual.
Yeah, that is unusual, yes.
Yes.
We
Oh.
traveled to California with my sister and her family one year when the oldest were teenagers. And what was fun about that was, it was a great trip, you know. Obviously, everything was wonderful. But we had a lot of paper and markers in the car. And every once in a while, there'd be a paper with pit stop written on it. They'd hold it in the window for the other car. Or, whatever. If they needed gas, and the kids would make great fun out of that one. So-
Isn't it amazing the things we did before cell phones?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before cell phones, before GPS.
Yeah.
When I was a child, I grew up on a farm, and to come to the cities, it was about 2.5 hours away, and that was a huge trip, just a huge trip. And we would have a map. My mom would have a map of the cities, and we had to be quiet in the car so they could pay attention to driving. But it was just amazing how back then things were simpler. You didn't have to worry about the cell phone or the GPS. Yeah, and when you think of the signs, how simple.
Yeah,
You know,
and the kids had a lot of fun doing it. They wrote all kinds of messages to each other.
oh, how
Yeah,
fun.
it was fun.
I think GPS is one of the things I myself would not be able to comfortably leave on a trip unless it was strictly freeways
Oh.
without having my GPS. Because if you get on a side trip or any kind of a side thing to go get gas or go to a restaurant in any of the towns, it's so easy to get turned around. I would not want to be without my GPS.
I love maps. I love
I do
maps,
too.
and I have to say, we have GPS now too, and we too could hardly live without it. But maps were fun because we would be on a driving trip and look at the map and say, "Hey, look at this is right over here. Let's go see
They're
it."
fun to look at.
Yeah, let's go find it. We don't do that with GPSs anymore.
We don't have a GPS.
Don't you?
good
Good
for
for
you.
you.
We do the map thing.
Do the map thing. Oh, okay.
When we discovered that this was going to be the topic, it prompted me to get out my road atlas. And
I have one of those.
look at how huge this is.
Oh, yes.
I keep it under my sofa in my living room because it's so huge. But the detail in the maps is, like you say, just phenomenal.
Yes.
And so this is how I figured out how many states I'd been to, because it prompted me to remember, oh, was I really in Mississippi once? I guess so. And then the memory came back.
You flip through and you find the states that you've been to. What a great way to do it.
Yeah,
Right.
that was
I
fun.
didn't do that.
Exactly the way Lori decided to do her book. She had been to 20 states and decided, why not go for broke and do them all?
You're right, go for broke. I love how you did that, because it was a huge goal, but it was such a fun goal at the same time.
Would you do it again
Oh, of course.
or differently? How would you do it differently?
If I would do it differently, I think I would plan to do something the same in every state, like go to all the state capitals or run a 5K race in all the states.
Or the state parks, maybe?
Oh, the state parks would be wonderful, something like that. And I may still do that, or do something like go to all the baseball parks or all the football stadiums or something. Yes, because even though I've seen all the states, I know that I've only seen this much of them, and there's so much more to see.
And things have changed too.
Oh, things have changed.
Yeah.
What
Yes.
would be next? Like Canada and Mexico? Is that on your list? Are they on your list?
They're not on my list just because I've been there, but
Okay.
I've not been to Europe. I've been to Taiwan and to London. But yes, Europe, and I would love to go back to Canada again, and I would love to go anywhere again. I should put it that way.
Do you have ancestors in Europe?
Yes, I do, in Germany, is where my
Yeah,
family came
That's
from.
mine too, and we did go there in 2000, and we found the home that my grandfather was born in.
Oh, how
how
fun.
So if you ever have a chance to do that, it's so emotional.
Okay.
I touched that house that my grandfather was born in. It was wonderful,
Was someone still living in it?
yes. And some of the family is still there,
Okay,
so, and living in that house, so.
yes.
That is exciting. I visited my family in Yugoslavia, which is now Slovenia, and they're still living in the house. My thoughts about that trip was, I'm going to Italy. Yay, I'm so excited. I'm going to see Yugoslavia. I don't know why, but there's family there. I had no idea what a beautiful country it was. I came away the highlight of my trip. Surprises like that are nice.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, I think travel surprises us and really wakes up so much in us. And I just really have enjoyed traveling. And I was not someone who traveled out a lot with my family. Like you mentioned, you know, it just wasn't a time when we traveled a lot, or there wasn't a lot of money extra to, and it was all car travel. So my big venture into travel came when I finished college, University of Minnesota. A year later, I had a job, and I was thinking, boy, is this all there is to life? And so I joined the Peace Corps. And
good for
I
you.
joined the Peace Corps, and the country that I was sent to was Turkey. So I went from very little kind of local travel with my family, and then my first airplane flight was Brattleboro, Vermont, Experiment in International Living, where I studied with Turkish teachers with a group of Peace Corps volunteers, and we studied Turkish for 3 months, intensive language
Yes.
training. And then the next thing, I was on a plane, and I was going, you know, from Minneapolis, St. Paul to New York, to Paris, and to Ankara. Did some more training there with our group, and then 4 of us were put in a taxi cab, and we drove cross country from Ankara in the middle of Turkey to Istanbul, to a little village an hour and a half out of Istanbul, where no one spoke any English.
Oh, my.
And the taxi driver just, we went to several villages, there were several of us, they just dropped us off. And there I was.
How
Oh, my
exciting.
word.
And,
Oh.
you know, there was no
amazing.
no telephone, there was no radio, there was nothing. There was no electricity, there was no running water, and I had to figure out, you know, how am I going to survive?
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to talk to my parents by phone for 2 years because
Oh,
there was no phone connection like there
Were they
is.
worried about you?
No cell phones.
I'm
Well,
sure they were worried.
We wrote letters, like you said, you
Yes.
did a lot of writing with your mother. I have a stash of all these letters too. And then also they made tapes. And I had a tape recorder with a battery operated, you know. And I would make a tape and send it to them, and they would make a
What a
tape.
great idea.
How long were you there?
2 years.
2 years.
That is really something.
So,
No
you know,
water,
it was
no
kind of
electricity.
dive into the deep end of the pool, you know,
It sure is.
Yes.
when it comes to travel. But it has really spurred a lot more travel in my life because I have just had such a wonderful experience traveling.
It's-
Well, we've run out of time, and that was such an exciting story. Thank you, ladies, for being here, and Lori for being our guest today. You've spurred us for a lot more travel memories and maybe even some new trips for us coming on. And thank you all for watching Generations. We'll see you next time.